Okay, well, it looks like A, we're gonna make a video. I took a couple weeks off. B, I have a returning project for somebody else that I had a video on earlier. So I'm gonna turn the camera around here in a second and show you what we're working on. You probably saw a little bit in the opening of the video. We got the engine back for the 91, 2, 3, whatever GT. Some of you will remember a few videos ago, and I'll link it if I can remember. I'll put it right here somewhere, to the video where I took this thing apart. The engine was trashed in it because of some very shoddy work, some bad tuning that led to 3 different sets of blown head gaskets, some broke pistons, a broke piston, and 3 extra lifted ringlands. So the engine was, essentially it needed everything in it. So anyways, we got all the stuff back. The parts are back from the machine shop, and it's time to put this car together for this guy. But you know what? I'm gonna insert a clip or some pictures right here of the work that I undid. So you'll already see an improvement. We haven't really even done anything to it yet, but check this out. And how is this for a blast from the past? Cobra intake, little bitty cute turbo, still actually has a Ford motor with a distributor in it. And what you just saw was the before view of the engine bay, and now I'm going to show you what it looks like before we drop the engine back in it. So you can see that big clump of wires that was in that previous thumbnail or previous screenshot there was just, it was a mess. And then over here, hadn't changed much there, but that's going to change after we get the engine back in the car. So the stock harness, which you see laying up there on the fender, it's usually routed right along that pinch weld right up here, connects to the starter solenoid and so on. All that stuff is going away since we're going to a Holley Terminator X, and some bigger 100-pound injectors, I think is what we got. And of course it's going to be on ethanol, and hopefully we don't have any problems with it. Oh, and here's the engine too, check it out. Doesn't look like much. It is a stock block 331 cubic inch scat bottom end forged piston kind of thing. I don't know what to expect out of it. Actually, I do. I wouldn't expect anything more than 600 to the wheels. It's not going to do it with this turbo. With this turbo, I think we're going to see 500-ish, maybe 520. Kind of hard to say. So that's really, for this guy, that's going to be fine. Yes, I know that you could put a stock LS motor in it with a turbo and make double that power, but that is kind of out of the scope of this project. So anyways, let's get started putting this motor in the car. That's enough talking. All right, so here is some of the stuff that I've taken out of the driver's side fender apron on this car. And that pile of junk right there is not going to be put back in the car. For some reason they put a vacuum pump on it, thinking that the cam was too big and it was killing the vacuum brakes. And I think it's probably the only Fox body on the planet that may have needed that, but we have taken it off because it doesn't need that. Judging by how all of the vacuum hoses did not have hose clamps on them, I pulled every one of them off with minimal effort, meaning the hose was too big for the barb that it was on. Things like that. It's probably going to be just fine without the vacuum pump, and if it's not, we're gonna make it where it is. Fan controller, doesn't need it. MSD 6AL box, doesn't need it. Launch RPM limiter module for the 6AL, doesn't need it. Let's see what else. Fan relay, does need it, but the fan relay was undersized for the fan and the wires were burnt up on it. So that's going to get replaced. Under the dash of this thing is just as much of a mess as it was under the hood. You know what? I'm going to take you in there and show you real quick, because I got a bunch of that stuff laying in the floorboard. You guys are going to like this. That is just some of the wiring that I've pulled out from under the dash. You can even see this wire right here was burned because it was zip tied so tightly to a piece of sharp metal that it was cut into. And the obvious part is it doesn't have any fuses in it. Yeah, so there's just a big mess of stuff in there. It's got to come out. Some of this stuff, these gauges are going to go. That tack is going to go. So we're going to de-1990-ish this thing, and we're going to bring it into the year 2021 and make it a little more modern. Tell you what, the one thing I hate about the Ford stuff, the factory style Ford stuff, like as in doesn't have a power glide or a GM transmission in it, is this. They use 4 torque converter bolts instead of 3, which really isn't the problem, but the OE style torque converters use studs. I think you can see in the video, stud, 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 and stud. So when you make the transmission to the engine when it's already in the car, you have to contend with getting that thing lined up all at one time. Probably learned some new words doing it, but you know, I guess that's just the way things are. Okay, well, the engine is sat down in this thing, and it is time to get under it and see if the torque converter is lined up enough to work, I guess. The bell housing bolts are really long, so that's good because I can back them out where they don't disengage from the block, but hopefully move the transmission far enough away to line the converter up if it is not lined up. So I'm gonna get under there and do that real quick and see if we can get this thing figured out. But it is at least in its home. Well, that was a little bit of a beating. I got all the stuff done underneath the car, and it probably doesn't look a whole lot different. Let's see if you can see that. Yeah, it probably doesn't look a whole lot different under the engine bay, or in the engine bay. Other than the motor is kind of sitting in the correct spot. So the torque converter bolted up, bell housing bolts are in, starter's on. Transmission never came out of the car, so there's nothing left to do there. So I think next we're going to do water pump, headers, lower intake, put the accessories on, blah blah blah, and kind of get this wrapped up right here. And then from there the fun starts. It's going to be pushing this thing outside, opening the doors wide, and getting under the dash and clipping this wiring and stuff out of it. And I'm really kind of dreading that part, but the show must go on, and that's what it's going to take to get it done correctly. And I'm actually kind of looking forward to it, believe it or not. On to the next part. Okay, so it is time to get some parts cleaned up. This thing was filthy when I took it apart, and I think you saw earlier in the video I power washed the engine bay, and it turned out really good. So we're going to continue that theme and power wash the intake and the accessories and so on and so forth. So I'm gonna show you how nasty this stuff is before I start out with. Let's see what this stuff looks like here. You can see the intake is just filthy. It's pretty oxidized too, so it may not clean up real good. The same for. All right, wow, I power washed that stuff, and I'll tell you what, I think I got more of the water on me than I did on the parts, but they turned out great. Actually cleaned up really good. I'm kind of surprised considering the condition this stuff was in. Intake and everything cleaned up nice. So I think the plan for this thing is the gas tank has probably got some old gas in it, and the fuel filter is probably pretty nasty. So having said all that stuff, I'm going to leave the 42-pound injectors in it to start it with, to make sure that there's no gunk that gets passed through those brand new injectors that we have for it. And I'll change the filter out and put some fresh fuel in it and run a little bit of that through it, and hopefully get everything cleaned out before we put the good stuff in it. But now it's time to get the intake whatever. Get the intake on, the lower intake that is, hopefully the accessories, and then we'll call it good. All right, we have a productive day on hand. So air conditioning, power steering, alternator, all in place. Intake is on. I guess really all that's left is turbo kit and radiator and stuff. So there it is. Pretty complete looking, or much more complete than it was a couple hours ago. So I guess the next step, like I just mentioned, we're gonna get the turbo kit put on, radiator, and then back it out where I can open the doors all the way and get the rest of that wiring out of this thing, because it's a nightmare still under the dash. But having said that, guys, I think that's a good place to end this one. I sure appreciate it. Everybody stopping by, checking it out and all that good stuff. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. We will see you in the next one. And do not forget, we are on Instagram nonetheless. Check us out there for a little sneak peek here and there of what is going on in the garage.